Chapter 10. New Friends and Old. I clutched the edges of my hammock, trying to ignore the rocking of the ship. My queasy stomach slung side to side while my thoughts sloshed around inside my head. What had I done? I kept seeing my money tin, half a year of my life, clutched in Mud's big hands. Now, with nothing in my pockets, I couldn't leave the ship at some random port. I had bought myself a year of freedom, but I was stuck with the prosperity, and when she returned to An Long, she'd take me back with her, back to Mud, back to the fens, with just a few lecks to show for it. I didn't know what made me feel worse, my pathetic situation or the seasickness. I cracked open one eyelid, and the room whirled. Definitely the seasickness. I'd never felt this bad before. We'd been at sea for 4 days, but I hadn't been able to leave my room. If our whole journey was going to be like this, I wish they would just throw me over the side now. My door swung open, and Master Payun popped his head inside the room. "Still chucking up?" he asked cheerfully. He'd brought me some cabbagey-smelling broth, and he set the bowl down on top of a trunk. "I don't have anything left in me to chuck," I croaked, though the smell of the broth was making me rethink that. "Staying down below will only make it worse," said Payun. "It's better to get up on deck and set your eyes on the horizon. Smell the fresh salt air." I didn't want to smell anything, ever. Payun didn't seem like he had been seasick at all. In fact, I'd never seen him this chipper. "Well, come up when you can. There are some people I want you to meet." "Yes, sir," I mumbled as he went out the door. I stayed swaying in my hammock until I couldn't stand the smell of the soup any longer. Maybe bringing it to me was part of Payun's plan to get me out of my room. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of my hammock. The ship pitched, tossing me out and onto my stomach on the floor. I picked myself up and staggered out the door into the dark hallway. The Prosperity was one of our Navy's biggest battleships, built at the height of the war to carry 72 cannons. Back then, the lower decks would have been gun decks, long open spaces where the sailors slept in hammocks strung between the cannons. The new renovations had divided the first of these decks into a warren of smaller rooms: the galley, the doctor's surgery, the carpenter's quarters, and my tiny room, which must have been some sort of converted closet. The crew slept one deck beneath me. To my left, a shaft of bright light shone down the companionway, the name for the staircase that led to the main deck above. I put my hands out to steady myself, but as I reached the bottom of the stairs, a body barreled down the steps, knocking me backward. "Watch yourself!" The voice was young, but the silhouette towering over me belonged to a big, balding man. A sailor with her hair tied back in a bun stomped down the steps toward us. "Grebe," she shouted at the bald man. "Lieutenant wants us up the mizzen-top." Her eyes swung to me. "Who are you?" "I work for Payun, the mapmaker. Do you know where I can find him?" "Quarterdeck," she barked. "Let's go, Grebe." I waited till the two of them had gone up, then climbed the stairs and stepped out onto the main deck. Squinting against the blinding sunshine, I nearly got knocked off my feet again when a sailor bumped into me. I stammered out an apology, but he had already moved on. All around me, the main deck swarmed with bodies. Sailors scurried around each other, pulling ropes and tying them off. Another group furiously scrubbed the deck boards with white stones. I shuffled around the rowboats stored at the center of the main deck, holding onto them for balance. Thwacking and cooing sounds came from inside. I peered over the rim of one of the boats and found it packed with chickens in wire cages. A rooster spotted me with its scale-crusted eye, and I lurched back as it lunged at its cage, talons out. "I hope we eat you first," I muttered. My eyes traveled up the towering mainmast. Reams of sailcloth crowded out the sky. The amount of rope strung across the ship seemed enough to wrap all the way around the globe. I caught confused glimpses of the parts of the ship I had tried to learn from old grandmother Noom before I left: stays and tackle, shrouds, and ratlines. Up above the top edge of the sails, sailors ran barefoot along ropes the way children might skip along the sidewalk. They were so high they looked like little dolls. If any of them lost their balance, they'd fall more than 100 feet before hitting the deck. The thought nearly made me throw up again. I made my way toward the rear of the ship, the stern, where the quarterdeck and top deck rose like cake tiers above all the commotion of the main deck below. I tried not to get trampled by any sailors as I climbed the stairs. I stepped onto the quarterdeck and gasped, salt air stinging my throat. In every direction there was only sea and sky, both a shade of bright, glittering blue. I had never seen anything so beautiful. I could have stood there for an hour without moving, drinking in all that blue, but Payun spotted me and waved me over. He stood near the ship's shrine, speaking with a man and woman who were clearly not sailors. They looked completely out of place, dressed like nobles in silk trousers and embroidered jackets. I bowed to greet Master Payun, and then bowed to the shrine, touching my thumbs to my forehead. Payun chuckled at me. "So the caterpillar has finally emerged from her cocoon." Being at sea seemed to agree with the old mapmaker. He'd left his coat down below, and he stood with his hands in his pockets, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. I knew he did this to hide his trembling hands, but it made him look like a sailor, right at home on the sea. "Friends, allow me to introduce Sodsai Arawan, my assistant. Sai, this is Mr. Lark, our ship's naturalist." I bowed, and Mr. Lark nodded back at me like a bobbing bird, jangling the lineal chain pinned to his collar. "A pleasure to meet you, a real pleasure," he said excitedly. Payun explained, "Mr. Lark is collecting specimens of interesting plants and insects to bring back to court." "For the Queen's new museum," said the energetic man. "I hope to fill an entire wing with rare discoveries." He bent at the waist to look right at my face. "But say now, you're quite young to be so far from home, aren't you?" Master Payun patted my shoulder. "Sai is just shy of 13. She's delaying her lineal ceremony so that she can accompany me on this trip." "Splendid," squawked Lark. "Good girl." "And this is our ship's surgeon, Dr. Pinching," said Payun. The hollow-cheeked woman standing between Lark was as grim as he was bubbly. "It's an honor to meet you, Doctor," I said, bowing to her. "You won't think it's such an honor if you ever need her services," said Payun with a laugh. The doctor didn't seem to find this very funny. "Boil all your water and keep your wounds clean," she said gravely. Payun smiled and shook his head at her. "Dr. Pinching, you've grown too used to wartime conditions. If our expedition goes as smoothly as planned, you should be able to put up your feet and relax." Lark leaned in and whispered, "Speaking of smooth," he snickered and nodded toward the stairs. "Here comes Miss Ryan Prossumsap." A young woman dressed in a black jacket and trousers was climbing the steps toward us. She seemed upper class with both her suit and her short haircut in the latest fashion, but the lineal pinned to her jacket was only 5 lengths long. Unlike Lark and Pinching, who looked sweaty and stifled in their silk clothes, this woman moved easily among the sailors, as if she'd spent all her life on ships. She bowed respectfully to Payun as she approached us. "Good morning to you all," she said, with a friendly smile, but she didn't stay to chat. Her hair swishing at her chin, she strode up the next set of stairs to the top deck. Dr. Pinching lifted her nose in the air. "And what exactly will her duties be on board?" Mr. Lark lifted his nose even higher. "Duties? Ha! She looks like a society peacock to me, nothing more. I'm sure she has no credentials whatsoever." This was funny coming from Lark, who was dressed more like a preening peacock than anyone. He was starting to remind me of Tippy. Now, Lark, it's too early in the day to forget our manners," Payun said out loud before leaning in and whispering to me. "That peacock is the reason you made it on board the ship at all. Miss Ryan is friends with our captain, and the ship's departure was held up just for her. If she hadn't been running late, you would have been left behind." I tracked Ryan as she strode up to a tall woman standing in the center of a swarm of officers on the top deck. My stomach did a little flip. Even if the woman's uniform hadn't been decorated with a dozen medals and ribbons, I would have guessed who she was. Captain Ankali Sangra, the Tiger of the Sea. No other captain who had sailed during the war had sunk more enemy ships than Sangra. She was revered all over Mancon for her bravery, even more so because she could have easily gotten out of serving altogether. She was the Queen's great-niece and could have taken a much safer position until the war was over. I looked for her lineal, but she either wasn't wearing it or kept it out of sight. Ryan and Sangra bent their heads together to exchange words. They addressed each other without bowing, like old friends. Master Payun put his hand on my shoulder. "Come along, Sai. If you're feeling better, we've got work to do." Payun led the way down the stairs. "My cabin is tucked underneath the quarterdeck. The door to reach it is here, off the main," he said. "Come on. Whoever loaded the crates from the shop must have been tipping back the wine bottle. It will take us all day to sort out that mess." As I followed Payun, I looked across the ship to see Grebe, the bald sailor who'd knocked me over, climbing down a rope as nimbly as a monkey. He jumped the last yard to the deck and stood up. That's when I realized that he wasn't a grown man at all, but a boy not much older than me. In the darkness below decks, I had thought he was balding, but in the sunlight I saw that the front section of his hair was missing, as if it had been ripped away. A thick, jagged scar ran across his forehead, from his crown to his eyebrows. My stomach lurched as I placed him. The last time I had seen him, he was wearing a cap, but I knew without a doubt that he was the same boy who had followed me that night in the fens. Before he could turn toward me, I pretended to look out to sea. My heart pounded. What if he placed me, too?